Communicating with Valve Software, the company who are behind the development and maintenance of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, although they didn't actually code the game, that was farmed out to Hidden Path Entertainment, has proven at times impossible, at best mysterious in its nature, and you could characterize it most obviously as fairly ineffective and inconsistent in kind of the frequency of communication, like what exactly we get, how much feedback there is possible, what lines of communication are there, is it possible to give information, is it a one-way communication? And particularly this was a topic worth having a discussion about over the recent coaching decision where Valve just came out, made this decision that they weren't going to allow coaches to be in-game leaders, and then after that came out a day or two later with a kind of a compromise of how they would allow certain aspects but not others. And it really led people to talk about this topic of how do we communicate with Valve? Like, can the community communicate with Valve? Do pro players actually communicate with Valve? Do casters communicate with Valve? Who does communicate with Valve? And how do we get information to them? And can we even? Do they care? So, first and foremost, one of the problems with Valve's lack of communication is that it leaves this vacuum into which people project and insert and inject their own speculation on what Valve thinks about things. And so, worst of all, when they do communicate with the community itself, when they communicate, I've noticed one of the big problems they have is they talk as a developer to someone who's the layman. And they make that classic mistake that people who are informed about a topic make, which is assuming that the other person not only is informed to the same degree as you, but understands the context of what you're saying and kind of the philosophy that informs what you're saying, which in many cases is not the case whatsoever, especially because when Valve communicates, it's just Valve. It's this big front, and we don't know who it is behind. Which personalities are discussing something with us here? Which mind is this particular idea coming from? Who's doing the explaining of it? Because we don't know these things, and we can't put a face or a name to exactly who's communicating. It's hard to know how you're supposed to interpret everything, what the subtleties and the nuances of Valve's comments are. And so as a result, when Valve says something, since they don't nail all the specifics and they don't have that whole Q&A frequently asked questions aspect to it where they nail all the context that you might wonder about, there has to be speculation at all times over what they exactly meant by something, and then when they leave a gap here, people insert their own ideas, or they have to speculate because they don't have any way of knowing what the specifics are. And then what they do say will be interpreted different ways, depending on whether someone likes Valve, whether someone thinks Valve is like altruistic, whether they think they're working towards the betterment of the game, whether they think they care about the esports side. All these different positions are what will skew how people interpret them. And one of the big problems I have with Valve's communication, one of the areas I do feel a bit miffed, is why should we even have to interpret what they say? Why should we have to speculate about what they mean? I mean, they act as though they were some kind of ancient monotheistic god who the message just comes out, their decree is made, a sign happens, lightning, a curtain is ripped across something, and then it's up to the holy men to put their heads together and interpret what does this mean exactly? Is God angry with something? Does he want something else? Or should we refer to some other precedent in past? Why do we have to do any of that stuff? These are essentially a bunch of people who are developers who make a lot of money from not only Counter-Strike itself, but esports as a side to advertise the game, to keep the game alive, to keep it vibrant, to keep it a place that people go to for a new game, not just a game that came out years ago that now there are new games that the casual fan might want to play. In this world where esports is very significant to people like Valve, and they make a lot of money from the esports side of Counter-Strike, why are these people not available for communication? Why aren't they more open? Why isn't there a channel there whereby communication can happen on some level, to some degree at least? They have Skype accounts. They have email addresses, most certainly. Why can't people, even high up in the community and teams, etc., why can't we get simple communication from them with any kind of consistency? Sure, some pro players get the word through every now and then. Some can get an email through. A couple maybe talk to someone on Steam. Why is there not any set channel? Why is there not some way, an expansive way for a lot of the community to get involved? Because I talk to many people in the community, many high up people who you're probably going to think talk to Valve, who don't. They maybe talk to them at the odd event. They've maybe sent an email off and had a reply once. Sometimes they've sent in really important emails, they've sent in really earnest messages and tried to discuss things, and they've got no reply. The problem, the biggest way to nail down the problem that Valve have is, not only is there no designated channel, there's not even a designated person who talks to the community as far as we're aware. I mean, I've been around the game, the esports side of the game, since the beginning in 2012. I'm not aware of who this designated person would be. As far as I know, there is not one. Now, there's also an issue that they don't even particularly have any consistency with when they respond to Reddit comments, for example. Now, I will say, a point that Semler made in his video, which I'll link up there about the devs, which is a good point, is that I can understand to a degree why someone doesn't want to just go willy-nilly replying to Reddit comments like out of nowhere, because it's true. People will then take that Reddit comment and they'll take it as some sort of statement from Valve, and they'll pick it apart and they'll nail it to the wall and they reference it forever. And sure, you don't necessarily want to do it in that particular sense. But as a result, think about that and then go the other way. Go to, well, in that case, when people are going to take that response, that's how we have to approach it. So we have to have thought out explanations. We have to try and be very specific about what we mean, then cover all the bases of possible misperceptions of what it might be. And then we have to have an opportunity for people to ask questions so we can clarify things. And we have to take feedback from people so we aren't just coming up with ideas whole cloth out of nowhere without any basis to them. Maybe run things by people before you go there. This is all great. I think there should be thought out explanations, real press releases, real comment to the community, real discussion via some sort of blog. There's got to be chances for the press to contact them and get clarification on things and what they're thinking and do interviews with them. There's got to be that community Q&A aspect. Sometimes maybe do more AMAs on a regular basis if you're going to update the game on a regular basis. Now, I know people will always point to the fact that Valve go to the majors and Valve talk to people at the majors. I think this is one of the most overblown aspects of communication between a game developer and the very vital primary community esports, which essentially keeps their game vibrant on even the casual level to some degree. Because people say it as though this is like an excellent mode of communication. This is some ideal way you can go and face-to-face talk to the guy over a beer, or you sit down with him in private and you have a discussion. That's a terrible way to talk to people. I mean, first of all, I've talked to them Valve devs that way before. At DreamHack Winter 2014, I had a discussion with them when I was actually quite upset with how they dealt with the cheating situation with Kaylee and some other players and how they disqualified their teams. Then at MLG Columbus, I talked to some of them at the after party. Now, first and foremost, I want to say this. These are not people who seem to reach out for this kind of community contact. Like, as far as I can tell, they talk to people who go up to them at the majors and have some sort of status or cachet as a person, and they'll discuss things with this person on the topics that person brings up. They don't actually reach out for contact. Like, no Valve dev has ever come to me or requested an audience with me or asked for my Skype or my email address or tried to run something by me or asked for feedback on something from me or contacted me. They've never done that to me, and most of the people I know, they're not having that sort of relationship with Valve. Even top level players, etc. A lot of them have not felt as though Valve have wanted to communicate with them in this way. It's more like they have to constantly be the one reaching out to Valve and trying to bang on Valve's door all the time and hope that eventually one day they answer once and tell you something quickly and then send you on your way, and then you have to go back and go through the whole process again before you can ever hope to get any sort of message from them. Now, I also think that meeting at events is actually massively ineffective compared to talking online, because when you're online, especially in text, you have unlimited amounts of times to backspace, to really think about the words that you're doing, how you're composing it, how you're putting together examples, link to evidence, videos, screenshots, demos, to discuss something at length. Someone can skim read it and then find the interesting parts. You can go back and forward in small messages like Skype, or you could go through small emails back and forth to each other and really clarify things and nail it down instead of writing one long thing and then having to respond in one long thing. There's so many benefits to communicating online, having Skype calls every now and then. One of the worst details about going to talk about someone at an event, especially at an after party, is that, first of all, there's no record or log of the conversation. On Skype, there is. You've got that Skype log there of text that you typed right there, so the person can go back at any time. I do this often in my work and check exactly what did that person say there. Oh, right, yeah, they said this part here, and then I find a date that I'd forgotten, or I find an aspect that's more important, or I find something where the quote in my mind, how I'd interpreted it based on what I thought about them, was slightly off, and so I go back, I double check it, all right, that's what they particularly meant by that. You can't do that with a conversation that happened in person. Also, not everyone has a great memory. I have a particularly good memory, but even I, like I say, use records and logs when I have Skype conversations available to me. Does some random Valve dev who might not even know really who this person is they're talking to, did I remember everything that person says and the reasons why and the arguments from merit for one thing or the other? No, very unlikely they do. Also, when you're at after party scenarios or in a bar on the night after an event, guess what? Alcohol's involved. There's weird social dynamics going on where some people want to talk to you, but if they talk too much, they might seem annoying, or the other person doesn't come and talk to you because they don't really know how you think about them. Then people are drinking alcohol. What happens if you talk to the Valve dev after his third beer, as opposed to if you get in there before he's sober? Is there a difference between how much they're willing to listen at that point in time? Are they then forgetting things because of the alcoholic effect? I mean, this is a particularly poor issue. I remember this. I'll just give you an example from my own life. I once talked about an issue with a player and a team, which was a specific thing that was really, It was a behind-the-scenes thing with this player that really could fuck up his team and his position in his team. And everyone had speculated for months and months about this. No one knew the real answer. And I got to this guy's in-game leader, and I talked to him, and he told me all the reasons why, and he told me all the aspects of why and what they were going to do about it. And you know what? I can remember having this conversation with him, but I drank loads of tequila after that. I don't remember actually what he said. That's it. I'm fucked at that point in time. I woke up the next day, barely remembering most of the night before. Never mind all that. Now, I'm not saying Valve devs go and do tequila slammers off the bar. No, it's not that ridiculous. But it's certainly not an ideal scenario in which to converse, especially when we're all online anyway, and we're all in these normal methods that are far superior to communicate from. Also, here's a key detail to add. This is why it's so important that I don't want people to think it's great that pros can talk to Valve at the events, and that if Valve tells you, we'll talk to the pros at the event, I don't want to hear that. And the reason why I want to reference this point is, I actually think, from my own experience of pros, in person versus online, and when they're online alone versus a social group dynamic, one of the key differences you see is that pros are not nearly as bold, they're not nearly as angry, as upset, as righteously indignant. They're not any of these things. They're not as bold in any sense when they're in person. It's just not the case. So as a result, a pro that is very passionate about something and thinks this is really bad and it's actually ruining the future of the game, and they can outline all these reasons why, and they can discuss the perspective of what they think the issue is and what was even wrong with their thinking of putting it in there. All that stuff. First of all, a lot of them won't even remember it when it gets to the event. That might be in the heat of the moment over a few weeks, and then that won't be something that sticks with them. And not everyone's like me where these important issues are always in the back of my mind. Then when they get to the event, they might think, part of them might be a bit also, I'm talking to Valve, they're all cool, they listen to my ideas, don't want to go too crazy on them, don't want to go too ham or any of that. So as a result, they don't go that in-depth on it. They're the ones compromising with all the time. Well, maybe if you just did a little bit like this, and then as a result, we'll end up with a game that is designed by committee and is all compromised in this way, where we haven't got any great things and any great features, and big steps, drastic steps that need to be taken are not taken, primarily for this. Also, the person feels awkward. They feel like they're insulting the person who made the game, so they downplay how important this is to them, or to the importance of the game. Or maybe if you could just think about possibly if something was to arise that you could perhaps one day think about looking at, as opposed to this needs to be addressed here, like there's cheating in this area, or we're worried about the way that the tournaments are structured in this particular sense, or this aspect of the recoils really ruined the game, and I played 1.6 for 10 years, and in it we had this aspect, and here's the pros and cons of that, and can you please look at this and think about how fundamentally this could change? They don't do any of that stuff. And so all those great meetings you think that are happening between like some NIP player, or some Mouse Sports player, or some guy from Cloud9 and the Valve devs, they're not great conversations. I've heard some of them. Most of them, I stopped listening after about 5 minutes, so I just walked away because I was like, nothing's going on here, mate. So it's a sad state of affairs if you think that's a great situation. I mean, to give you an example, because this is a problem that Valve do take that approach of thinking that's where they can get a lot of good feedback. I'll give you a couple of instances from the CSGO launch, which was when Counter-Strike Global Offensive was announced, I was very skeptical of it. I actually wrote a column on it, and I'll link the column in the description box below, as to why I didn't think the game would succeed, and actually I thought it couldn't be as good as 1.6 for fairly obvious reasons. I outlined them all, explained it all, and I got a lot of backlash at the time. A lot of people telling me, like, you should be like more optimistic, or give Valve a chance, like, this is bullshit, like, you're just assuming that it can't be as good, or why do you have such a cynical view of Valve? And I had my own reasons, because I knew about the behind-the-scenes stuff of Counter-Strike over more than a decade at that point in time, and how Valve had kind of neglected it like the red-headed stepchild of the Valve company, even though the game had made them a lot of money for very minimal effort on their part. And so what happened was, I think I've told this story before. Let me think. I know I've said it on Twitter before. I don't think I've said it in a video before. Maybe I told it on a podcast. But basically, at the time, I was very critical of it. And so Torble, one of the guys who was one of the founders of ESEA, someone who I'd known in the past, who worked with him at ESEA and Team 3D, and he reached out to me, and he basically said something along the lines of like, one of the Valve devs like read your piece, and rather than just criticize the game, why don't you help the game become the best it can be? So what he said to me was, if you had like a dream team of who Valve should talk to from 1.6 of like pros now, can you get them together and help me get contacts for them? And then Valve can email these guys, send them betas of CSGO, have discussions with them and get feedback. And you know what? This has always been my philosophy. I agreed with this because I agree with the same philosophy. If it's possible to try and make something better, as long as it's not a waste of your time and you don't have your time's better spent elsewhere, sure, put in some effort. And even if it's not going to be as good as you think it will, maybe it can be better than it would have been. So I agree. Try and be part of the solution, right? So I said to him, you know what? I'll go one better. Rather than just get some current pros now, I will literally make a list of my dream team of all time. The best minds, the best in all the areas of the game. So the most skilled players of all time. You can already guess some of the players I had there. Some of the absolute best, most skilled players in the history of Counter-Strike. Players who invented certain firing techniques, certain styles of playing the game. Players who were very intuitive and had a very good ability to read the game. Players who innovated the metagame of tactics over the years. Players who were great winners and champions. Players who were great at communication and team play. People who community figures who'd been involved in some of the early technologies of the game and knew how to upgrade things in a way Valve had never done in the game. I put together this dream team list, and you know what? I went out and I got almost every name on that list to agree to give me an email address, contact for Valve. All of them, I explained why, by the way, current legendary pros at the time, the best in the world from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I got all these people to agree, like, yes, we will all help Valve out. We'll play any beta version they give us. We'll give feedback, we'll make them demos, we'll contact them with email, whatever they want. We're up for this. Let's make CSGO a huge game. I got him this list. I came back to Torbal with it. I gave him the list. And I said, there you go, take it to Valve. Because Valve had asked him for the feedback, okay. And I remember I didn't hear anything back. And so a month, maybe 2 months later, I contacted him. I said, so whatever happened with that list with Valve? And he says, oh, yeah, actually, Valve doesn't need that now. They'll just talk to pros when they meet them at IEM New York. And at the time, I think it was 2011. Yes, it was the end of 2011 because it was the IEM. Let me think what season was that. IEM 6 New York stop, which was the one where I know this because actually Lopez was there playing with his team, who at the time would probably have been WinFact, and that team was playing there. Or was it Power Gaming? I think it was WinFact, and so. I remember at that tournament, they had a show match in CSGO in like the beta or the alpha or whatever. And it was players like K-Sharp, who at the time had been retired for a long time, and Lurpis and Nothing, and a bunch of other people played in this show match. And after the show match, Valve talked to some of them. What did they think of the game, all the rest of it. Like I've explained in this past scenario about don't put your faith in the pros talking at an event in a throwaway manner. This is what happened. People just gave little tips here and a few comments there and this, that, and the other. And basically, that's it. And guess what? Not much happened from that. And that wasn't in even vaguely the level of communication and depth they could have gone to if they'd have used my list. So there's strike one in terms of Valve not really caring, quite frankly, about communicating with the best minds in esports for their game. Here's step two. So I was very skeptical of it. But what's funny is, a lot of people won't believe this, Lurpis at the time, Lurpis obviously played for a long time at 1.6, including the very last years, led one of the best North American teams, led the best Finnish team of all time, one of the all-time great leaders, top 10 leader of all time in Counter-Strike history. This is a guy where, what's funny is, he actually always used to say towards the end of 1.6, you know what, it's not really 1.6 the game that I never really play for anymore. Like, the game itself isn't that fun. Like, I wouldn't play it for fun myself if I wasn't a pro anymore, but I play because I love the competition. I love going to big tournaments. I love trying to beat the best guys in the world. I love what the game allows me to do and the incredible things you can do in terms of strategy and skill. This is what he said he loved. And so as a result, he said, you know what, even though you're so skeptical of it, and you might be right, maybe CSGO won't be a very good game and it will be much worse than 1.6, as long as there is still a scene, like there's still majors. I mean, there weren't Valve majors at the time. There's still big tournaments. There's still good players and good teams. He said, I'll probably still try the game. I'll probably always be involved in Counter-Strike because I just love competition. And I said, I know what you mean by that, but believe it or not, you're taking for granted that even though you and me know 1.6 is even the best version of Counter-Strike, and it's definitely not a godlike game, but it's a pretty good game. I said, you're taking for granted how much the fact that it was a good game to get you into it has still allowed you in the background, things you take for granted, to enjoy it, and then you add the competition on top. And even if it's not mostly about anything other than competition, that 10 to 20% of the game being good is going to be a big deal, and you'll notice when that goes, mate. And at the time, he was like, yeah, I'm not really sure I will. Like, I think it'll just be competition for me. Well, what's funny is, when the beta for CSGO came out, I think it would have been, I don't know, probably 2012 sometime, When this was coming out, Valve initially set up this forum, which is a private forum where pro players could be added to it, and then they would play the beta, and then they could go in there and they could give their thoughts and their feedback on it. And supposedly, Valve devs were going to communicate with them and take their feedback. There'd be discussions among pros. And what happened was, because Lurpus was really positive that, like, I'm going to play this game, there's going to be competition, and he wanted people involved in this, he was actually going around and he was telling other pros, like, come on, we got to get conversations going. He was getting pros and their email addresses so they could be added to this private forum, so they could have discussions there. And he got a bunch of people and he was trying to spark discussions there. And what happened was, there was nothing going on there. Pros were barely talking. When they were talking initially, like, Valve wasn't responding much. Valve was just like having totally idle at times, totally inactive. There was no conversation going on. And what happened is he got so disillusioned with this, he actually did an interview, I think it was with PC Gamer, saying something along the lines of, like, that Valve didn't care about communication, like they really had shown him no signs that they actually cared what the pros thought. And as a result, it was one of the first moments where the initial CSGO audience labeled him as really negative and said, like, he was a bad force for the game. And ever since then, it wasn't until recently he kind of, like, turned the corner and became a popular figure again, because over the first year or so of CSGO competition, people used to shit on this guy all the time and say, oh, you just never liked CSGO from the beginning, you hated it, you thought it was a piece of shit game, and you were just biased because you think 1.6 is better, and you're just mad that salty that you're not very good in this game. But people sold all that stupid stuff. And yet what's funny is, like I said, this was the guy who actually was very optimistic. This was the guy doing more than most of the other pros trying to do so. Now, what's funny is at the time, I remember there was a player, off the top of my head, I think it was Get Right, who came out and made some comment like, no, everyone is trying to talk in these forums. And I actually said this to Lurpus. I remember asking him, is that true? We looked in the forums, it was totally nonsense. Like, they, as a lot of pros, as I've been trying to outline to you in terms of their mentality, they were just so scared that if you ever said anything critical to Valve, even like about the game's problems, that you'd like scare them like this tiny little mouse. If you don't sneak up, put a tiny piece of cheese out. Oh my god, we scared it away. And then Valve will run away into the Valve's home, we'll never see them again. That's the way they thought you had to treat Valve. And so as a result, they were just hoping that if they put on this fake persona, this fake front, that everything was great and that they were listening to the players, then the game would get big. They thought it was like some kind of superstitious magic, but then the game will get really big because people will think it's a good game, and then it'll be just as big as 1.6 and I'll have a full career again. It was that sort of a mad logic, even though Valve weren't communicating with them at all. So the point I'm making here is, you look at all these instances, they've got a really bad track record of communicating with the community, and yet, now, the esports side of it is worth millions and millions every year. They're making tons of it. And these are the people, sure, not all the suggestions they make will be right. And by the way, many of them are being mutually exclusive. These are the people who can give you the best feedback on the game, who can give you the cutting edge ideas, who can tell you how the meta is played and how certain things are actually applied in a pro context that they aren't theoretically in a casual context of when you make game changes or you make rule changes, and people aren't experts in those areas and haven't spent a decade in that area, or whoever it might be. They can't necessarily help you with that sort of information. So this is where you get that stuff, and there's not the direct channels and there's not the set people to be able to talk to you in that particular manner. This is one area where I'll even give Riot Games, the makers of League of Legends, some credit. At least they do put out these official updates on and reasons as to why. And sometimes they will go into Reddit threads and give explicit reasons and answer people's questions. Not at massive depth, still not the level I'd like to in that game, but you can certainly contact them a lot more than you can Valve. Now, people will always bring up this rhetoric, which Valve themselves began, where they say, that's because Valve has kind of like a flat management structure, and what we do is there's not really a hierarchy, and we're all just like cool people who work for Valve who have like this kind of Valve vibe, you know, and we can all work on whatever project we want. And so like we wouldn't like set someone and make that person have to work on this one thing, or say like it's your job to do this. Like whoever wants to work on anything, like works on one thing or the other. Like, here's the analogy I gave when I did an interview with Slingshot Esports. Because this particular topic, communicating with the community on issues like this, like developer updates, changing the rule sets, what we're going to do with majors, and also issues like, are people cheating in the community? In this particular area, this is the analogy I gave. When Valve, in their offices, one of the bins is overflowing, or in the cafeteria area, someone has to go and put all the slop and all the leftover food and stuff, put that into a big bin outside. Like, who does all that stuff? Who comes if someone's sick on the floor and cleans it up? Is it just a Valve dev? Does one of the Valve devs have to himself spontaneously go, you know what, today I think I'm going to do that, I'm feeling the vibe that sick needs to be cleaned? No, you know what, they have a janitor. And you know why they have a janitor? Because ultimately they understand that certain things need to be done, certain things have an importance to allowing the whole situation to run there with any kind of effectiveness, like an actual civilization. So someone, even though it's not a sexy job, has to be the job of janitor. Well, guess what? We need a janitor to watch the community in terms of cheating. We need the janitor to communicate with the community in terms of updates, in terms of changing things in the competitive scene. We need someone to do these very basic tasks to set a framework from which we can all help make this game better, as opposed to Valve just sitting up on high and then every now and then suddenly like 10 cows fall over dead and we're all supposed to intuit what does that mean. Oh, are they angry with us? Oh, maybe it's because of what we said about the R8. Like, this is not a reasonable state of affairs for a game that's making hundreds of millions of dollars.